Okay, we'll start with this. It appears the WBC champion at 122 pounds, Yamileth Mercado of Mexico, will be returning to action later on this month on the 26th, opposite the ring Paulette Valenzuela, in what is a defense of the green belt. Yamileth Mercado, one of 4 champions in today's super bantamweight division. You have Mayweather Rivas holding the WBA, Yamileth Mercado holding the WBC,
Sigaline Lafarve of France holding the WBO,
and Ellie Scottney,
Crawford,
newly crowned IBF champion. This still very much is a division that remains divided, with all 4 alphabet titles held by 4 different fighters, 4 different champions. I know of no expressed desire from Yami Mercado to unify titles with the other champions at this weight, she herself being a young champion, but still a champion that has been one for a while now.
She won the WBC title from then WBC champion Fatuma Zarika in what was their second fight, their rematch, back in November of 2019.
That way, Yamileth Mercado is no squirrely amateur. She's been a champion for at least 3 going on 4 years, and she'll be opposite the ring Paulette Valenzuela very soon, a seasoned fighter, seasoned contender, sporting a professional record of 16 wins with 2 losses, no draws, 4 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 18 professional bouts. She's been around the block.
Pretty tough.
To Yamileth Mercado, who sports a professional record of 21 wins with 3 losses, no draws, and 4 knockouts, also having never been stopped. Never been stopped in about 24 professional bouts. She's young, but she's experienced.
Just saying a lot, because Yami Mercado has ventured north of super bantamweight at least once that I can remember, opposite the ring none other than Amanda Serrano. And even though Yamileth lost the fight, lost it wide, she didn't get stopped, so she's durable.
7 years younger than her quarry, 7 years younger than Paulette Valenzuela. Paulette is 32, whereas Yamileth is 25.
A young champion, but an experienced one.
I first saw Yamileth Mercado in action. She had the look of a mid-range to inside fighter, mid-range to inside brawler, a flat-footed one. But her last couple of fights, I've noticed a change in Yamileth Mercado, electing to beat those feet and be more of a mover, more of a boxer and less of a brawler.
Seems a different fighter to me. A changed fighter from the fighter that I saw get into an all-out war with Alejandra Guzman. The same Alejandra Guzman that just knocked out Ramla Ali. Yamileth Mercado beat her some fights ago.
Some fights later, she seems a more nuanced fighter with a more layered approach, more streamlined, having last seen action in March of this year opposite the ring her then mandatory challenger, Kurukwashe Chiwandire, winning a unanimous decision over 10.
This fight with Paulette Valenzuela will be her second fight of this year, and she's kept a good schedule of activity, a good steady schedule. 2 fights this year, looks to be 2 fights this year, 2 fights last year.
3 fights the year before that in 2021. That's saying that Yamileth Mercado and her team have done a very good job of keeping her busy and keeping her active.
She's amassing a very respectable resume.
The win over then WBC champion Fatuma Zarika, the win over hard-punching Alejandra Guzman. It's coming right off that knockout win over Ramla Ali, the win over then unbeaten Angelica Riscone.
More recent win over Mexican legend Mariana Juarez.
See how she fares against Paulette Valenzuela, who has kept a rather busy schedule herself, having fought at least 4 times in 2021, 2 times in 2022, and she's already fought once this year, so she ain't got no ring rust she needs to shake off.
She'll be about as sharp as she can be.
Currently on a 3-fight winning streak after having dropped a decision to France's own Sigaline Lafarve way back there in November of 2019. Sigaline is this division's WBO champion.
It appears that Paulette Valenzuela will get another crack at the apple for another title with another champion.
Because Yamileth Mercado has already seen action once earlier this year, and she's set to see action again later on this month, that leaves plenty of room and plenty of time to schedule another fight in either the fall or winter months. And because Yamileth Mercado has been a champion a long while now, you start to wonder, when is she going to pursue a unification match? Does she want to fight any of the other champions at this weight? Because there are 3 other girls holding 3 other belts.
She herself has been a champion for 3 going on 4 years.
7 fights since having become WBC champion at this weight. You just get the sense that it's about time she should get off the pot.
Gonna unify or not?
We'll say this upcoming fight with Paulette Valenzuela, it is a solid fight with a solid fighter. It's a solid opponent.
If she makes it through that fight, how many more fights like this are we going to see?
Not attempting to slight Yamileth Mercado. I reiterate, she actually has one of the best resumes in this entire division, arguably the best.
Well, a 3-year reign without any unification matches when there are 3 other champions at this weight, something's gotta give.
We'll talk more about this fight as the fight date approaches. Men's welterweight news. Former pound-for-pound king Floyd Mayweather Jr. stated, "If I were training Spence, or I was in his corner, I don't think he should be fighting at 147 pounds at all. I don't think he should be fighting at 154. I think he should be fighting at 160 or 168.
It's just a sophisticated way of saying you think Errol was drained.
Just getting creative when he says it. So are Errol Spence Jr.'s fans. They're pointing at the weight as well, still depriving Terence Crawford of the credit he deserves, even though they're the ones that picked Errol to beat him, so that as soon as things go sideways...
You're worried about his weight. He stayed at welterweight too long. This is exactly what Terence Crawford said would happen.
What are we talking about, like 3, maybe 4 years ago? Terence Crawford, in his own words, said that not only would he knock out Errol Spence Jr., but when he did, everybody's gonna blame it on the weight.
So when I stop him, y'all gonna say he was too weak?
On my life.
And he stayed at 147.
You would not stop me. You would not stop me.
Okay.
Crazy. Who's he smoking on? Ask me, who the hardest.
It was in November of 2018 when Terence Crawford made that prediction, and 4 or 5 years later, time has proven him right. That is exactly what Floyd Mayweather and many others are saying when the fight never had to take this long to make. If it did, it's because Errol was insistent he clean up his side of the street first. So you don't get to use this as a crutch, as an excuse. All these years later, Errol Spence Jr. certainly isn't.
So why are you?
It wasn't Bob Arum's idea to put the fight off for this long. It certainly wasn't Terence Crawford's idea. At the end of the day, it was Spence's handlers who wanted to put distance between Errol and a Terence Crawford fight. More insistent that he fight other people on his own side of things, when the ideal time to do this fight was 4 to 5 years ago, was in circa 2018 and 2019.
Bringing up weight as much as these guys are is a veiled attempt to take away from Terence Crawford's victory that it wasn't Terence Crawford that beat Errol Spence Jr., it was poor weight management.
That's not what you guys were saying after he fought Danny Garcia.
No.
That's not what you guys were saying when he battered Yordenis Ugas,
No.
fractured his orbital bone, and that's not what you guys were saying in the build-up of this fight. You don't have this to lean on.
Errol isn't leaning on it, so why are you?
Why is Floyd saying that Errol Spence Jr. would be more adequately suited to campaign as a middleweight and a super middleweight instead of a junior middleweight? I don't agree with him. I've long maintained that the bell tolls for Errol Spence Jr. should he venture north of welterweight, because at welterweight, while he might have generous physical dimensions for a 147-pounder, he won't have generous physical dimensions for a 154-pounder. The guys up there, they're bigger guys.
Errol Spence Jr.'s come-forward style was bound to catch up to him sooner or later.
There are a lot of people out there that like to think of Errol Spence Jr. as being a crafty southpaw, crafty how Pernell Whitaker was crafty, but he's not that cerebral a fighter, and he never was. At his very best, Errol Spence Jr. mirrors a battering ram, a bulldozer.
He's more ferocity than finesse, and the problem with that is, that kind of base style, the more you move up in weight, the more it works against you.
Stepping into your jab and trying for body shots mid-range to inside, being a volume puncher, opening up that much, being that aggressive, the more you move up in weight, as much as you're relying on physicality,
The more you move up in weight,
as much as you're relying on being stronger than the man opposite the ring, the more you move up in weight, more that's going to catch up to you, because at some point, you're not going to be stronger than the man opposite the ring.
you weren't stronger than Terence Crawford. Yet another reason your plan backfired.
Now he's supposed to be stronger than the guys opposite the ring 160? Stronger than the guys opposite the ring 168. Are you kidding me?
You're nuts.
You're making excuses. All this talk about weight from the same guys who were perfectly okay with Gervonta Davis putting weight restrictions on Ryan Garcia. They were not concerned with how those weight restrictions might affect Ryan ahead of the fight with Gervonta. So why should we be concerned that a welterweight champion had to make welterweight for this fight?
We shouldn't.
We're not. They are. Floyd thinks that Errol could do well for himself at middleweight. I think they'd have to scrape him out of the ring with a spatula anywhere above 154.
That's what I've been saying.
Now, Anthony Joshua, who is now Errol Spence Jr.'s stablemate by way of Derek James, all of his fighters, he's saying that Spence will give Crawford a much tougher fight in a rematch, a sentiment I've heard many times already since the Crawford fight, and I maintain my original position that Errol's approach is far too simple for a counterpuncher, an ambidextrous switch hitter like Terence Crawford. It didn't work at 47, it won't work at 54.
Yeah, maybe Errol will feel better at junior middle, but so will Terence.
They don't want to understand that. Anthony Joshua does, and he said that's not the Errol we know. He'll be back better if you look at it for what it is. And I rate Terence Crawford before this fight. Terence is an elite fighter. So is Errol. Now, Errol just wasn't... I know he wasn't that guy I watched many times before. I didn't see everything in training camp because we had different times, but I did see him working hard. But just from a performance point of view, I think they should have confidence in themselves, knowing in the rematch, if they get whatever happened in the training camp, which was going wrong, if they get it right, I think they'll give Bud a much tougher fight. Errol didn't land on his back. He wasn't knocked out on his back. He got stopped on his feet. So run it back and start again.
It's not something that happened in training camp, this particular training camp that got Errol Spence Jr. knocked out.
It's not something you can simply correlate and quantify to a mistake. It's his style, his entire identity as a fighter. Terence is all wrong for him, and he always was. That's why this fight took so long to make, because underneath it all, they knew it.
If he just goes in and fights Bud again the way he is now, he can fight him at 54, he can fight him at 65, none of that would matter.
Does it look any different, in your opinion, at 54?
As a coach, I want to let Errol go get everything checked out and make sure he's neurologically okay. If his mind, everything's okay, and his body's okay, then we'll consider a fight at 154, but we need some time to make some adjustments, because we haven't been forced to make adjustments in our career.
Why so many people are struggling to wrap their minds around what they saw is because they drunk the Kool-Aid on Errol Spence Jr. Watching him fight flat-footed fighters like Mikey Garcia and Danny Garcia. Watching him fight a guy that you don't have to find in Sean Porter.
He'll find you.
Kell Brook, after the devastating defeat all the way up there at middleweight to Gennady Golovkin to drop back down in weight to 147 for Spence, they didn't want to admit it to themselves, and all these years later, they're in shock and awe that a guy they put on a pedestal was so easily dismantled.
They can't believe it.
They're pointing to the weight. In truth, I pointed to the weight, among other things, among other intangibles that take a back seat to the stylistic matchup, the way the fighters go about fighting a fight, that Errol is simply too easy.
It's too easy to read.
Making 147 was hard for him in the Danny Garcia fight, the same way it was hard for him in the Ugas fight. But why did he win those fights and not this one?
It's too easy to read.
Boiling down to 147 was already difficult, but he was able to secure the win with those guys, so why not with this one?
It's too easy to read.
Focusing on how Errol reacted to being hit without focusing on why Errol got hit in the first place. Why'd he get hit so much?
I'm not in the business of getting these people to accept defeat because they've already been defeated.
Being in denial about it won't change that. No, the real lesson here, if there is one,
There is.
these guys don't know what the fuck they're talking about. For 5 fucking years, these guys, they don't know the ball from the bounce.
Clueless.
There's no point in mincing words with these guys. Just sit back and enjoy the show.
They perform all of their mental gymnastics.
Same people. The same people that were telling you that Kell Brock wasn't weight drained when he fought Errol are the same people telling you now that Errol was. They had no consideration for Kell Brook dropping from 160 to 147.
Right.
So why am I supposed to have consideration for Errol, who was there the whole time?
At 147.
Terence Crawford says that if it wasn't for Errol, this fight wouldn't have happened, and that's the one credit that I do give Errol Spence Jr. Then again, Errol's not the one coming up with cockamamie excuses and conspiracy theories.
This is fans.
I have to take the rematch if Spence calls for it. Crawford said in an interview with Hot 97, he gave me the opportunity. Without Errol giving me the opportunity and us coming together and him agreeing to certain terms and me agreeing to certain terms, y'all wouldn't have witnessed history or greatness Saturday. It's only right that I give him the credit that he deserves. He's right. He told me at the weigh-in, you ain't gotta thank me for making this shit happen. I told him, you ain't gotta thank me neither. We're about to make history. A lot of people were asking me, but what you meant by that. To be honest, if it wasn't for Errol, this fight wouldn't have happened.
It was Errol's decision to go against the grain, go against the established plan. Their plan was to put him in there with Keith Thurman at 154.
You will have heard me say this many times in the build-up of this fight, that if it's happening now, it's because Errol Spence Jr. is deciding to bite the bullet and lose, but lose with honor, lose with some integrity, even if he was completely dismantled from round 2 onward.
Took his beating like a man.
To be honest, if it wasn't for Errol, this fight wouldn't have happened. That's what he means by, I don't have to thank him, because he played a big part in this fight happening because he stood on what he wanted to accomplish. And everything that it was going to take for us to fight, he stood on it and he put his pride to the side. I put my pride to the side. There was things that he felt as if I was getting over with, but he still let it go. And there were things I felt I didn't need to agree to, but I agreed to it because we both knew the magnitude of the fight.
Errol could have continued the charade a while longer by moving up in weight, not fighting Terence Crawford and taking on Keith Thurman instead. I'm fairly confident that's what Tim Smith, that's what Al Heyman, and that's what Stefano Spinoza would have preferred. That's what they would have wanted instead of watching Errol get annihilated.
It's not just about Errol, you know. It's not just about him having an unblemished record. It's about how this reflects on the brand, the Showtime brand, the PBC brand of boxing, that yet another premier boxing champion was destroyed by a top-rank fighter. Rather, a former top-rank alum, a former top-rank fighter.
Fight a top-rank belt.
Terence Crawford rose to being one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the sport under the top-rank banner. For the most part, he did. Even if he's not a top-rank fighter now, the grooming process that helped him make him what he is.
You see, Top Rank is in the business of grooming fighters, and the PBC is in the business of growing brands. They're not the same thing. So when you get a real fighter, a bona fide fighter, a true fighter in front of a PBC guy, well, you end up with Vosdick versus Stevenson.
Better be versus Brown, Bud Crawford versus Sean Porter, Bud Crawford versus Errol Spence, Naoya Inoue versus Stephen Fulton, and the 2 shellackings that Wilder took to Tyson Fury.
Those aforementioned fights, they weren't just fights that PBC fighters lost. If you're paying attention, those are fights where PBC fighters were demoralized.
Common denominator, the running theme, that the second you let those fighters outside of the fence, or you let some other kids from some other side of the street play with them, you see what happens.
Errol Spence Jr. does deserve credit for taking his beating like a man.
I think he does. But if the beating turned out to be as bad and as demoralizing as it did, it's really no less than they deserve for attempting to tear down Terence Crawford, sully his name, outright denying his existence, not featuring him in their graphics as one of the welterweight champions at welterweight.
Yeah.
They got what they deserved.
PBC brand took a hit.
Turned out to be a successful fight. 21 million at the gate, over 600,000 pay-per-views sold, but it came at a high price, a high cost. A fighter they spent a long time trying to sell you.
Was destroyed by one they spent a long time trying to tear down.
Truth always comes to the surface. Sooner or later, the truth always comes out.
Errol Spence Jr. like to call himself the truth when the truth is...
Terence was always the better fighter, and you knew that. It's why it took you so long to fight him.